little strut over there. As I said that, I got a little shiver of a little breeze came through, which is nice. It always reminds me of being in nature, even though I'm scoping from inside a room. All right, Tuesday, December 29th, 6:44 p.m., Beyond the Conspiracy. See, this is my new show, Beyond the Conspiracy. No, they'll never get fed up with it. There are bills to pay. This is 100% why I keep TakeBackSpace totally devoid of that, because it's so easy to get involved and wrapped up in like selling space, but nobody's talking about like what's really happening here. Like, it's more of a philosophical climb, right? Mentally, like, it's incredible that people walked on the moon and came home. I mean, it's one of those things that endlessly talk about-able, but nobody talks about it except to point fingers and say, you lied. And the other person's like, no, we didn't lie. I swear we didn't lie. It looks just really fishy, but we didn't lie. But nobody says, okay, what's happening with the radiation? Like, what happened with the suits? What happened with the air conditioning on the surface? How did they get back? What are the metaphysical implications? We have Chinese landers, we have Apollo missions, we have Russian robotic missions that have taken pictures of the far side of the moon. It seems to me like there is a far side of the moon. The images that we've seen from agencies, it's one of those things that my take on it is multi-threaded, because it's one of those things that you can't corroborate as a backyard astronomer or as an amateur. Taking pictures of the far side of the moon is basically something you have to take agencies at face value and say, okay, these pictures of the far side of the moon are actually real. It's one of those difficult things because I like being able to take pictures of space myself and say, okay, this is what that looks like, this is what that looks like. So did China land rovers on the moon? It seems like it is possible. However, it comes with a huge thing for me, which is we never get the kind of footage that you would expect from a mission like that. And then the typical response from pop Scientology, not Scientology, pop science, scientism, is this kind of thing where it's like, that's not what it was meant to do. That's typically where it ends, right? If you start to get into that discussion, you're going to get into a name-calling ad hominem attack matchup, because people are like, you don't understand science, you don't understand why they send these robots, it's not to take cool pictures, just be lucky with what you get. That's the basic premise wall for being able to discuss this topic in public, right? That's how, there are several, but that's one of them. So, okay, landers may be real. It's very possible. Robots can do a lot of things. There are pictures from the far side of the moon, tons of them corroborated by tons of countries. It looks like the moon. From somebody who's seen the moon 10,000 times, those far side images look like they could be part of the moon. They could be Sarah's. They could be made up from some AI, but it seems like it's real. So the big caveat is, yes, robotic landers can land on the moon, but where is the shot of halfway to the moon looking at Earth? Where is the shot halfway looking at the moon, like approaching the moon? And they're like, well, you can't point the camera that way because you can't do... All these excuses come up when you try and ask the obvious questions. How long did it take? No, can't access telemetry. What kind of shielding does it have? No, rudimentary factoids in a little, PDF attached to the video. Sometimes nothing. In fact, like if you really look up the Indian landers, Chinese landers, there's a dearth of information. So my take on it is, and I've dug in, so like you can find Chinese sites and you can look through all the archived images, and there are tons and tons of images, but the images are of the lander on sand, what looks like sand. Now, okay, yes, it may look like other images of landers that have landed on the moon or Mars. You could make that argument. The main thing is that there are images that are not there. So the biggest part that I think is conspiratorial in this whole game of space is what's actually missing, not what's there and seems sketchy. And so what's missing to me is like approaching the moon, leaving the moon, an Earthrise shot, a sun shot from the surface of the moon, a feature corroborated by the LRO or the Grail missions, a feature corroborated by one of our 200-inch telescopes, by a retroreflector, some sort of corroborative thing where it's like, okay, you landed a rover on the moon, and here are the obvious photos. I think that's really it. There are just no, at least you got to say, this is what changed my mind about Apollo. Now, I'm still on the fence about people walking on the moon, to be honest. Maybe they did. But rovers, it seems, or robots in general, unmanned vehicles, can go into space. Because there are photos that are just you can't make, it would be easier to literally get into space than it would be to fake these images across the world. So I definitely think things like Juno, things like the Cassini missions, things like Hubble, these things can definitely exist in space. So did China land a rover on the far side of the moon and send back really juicy data? Okay, what's really on the far side of the moon that's not on the front side? I don't think really anything. If you look at it, there's this huge, what looks like a huge impact crater, right? This basin. But besides the basin, the rest looks like a fractal recursion of the front side of the moon. In fact, I would argue that the side facing Earth is far more promising in terms of what it gives information-wise than, I'm missing what the basin's called, but there's just a giant, what looks like an impact on the far side of the moon. What I would say is that it's very hard to figure out what that is, but what it looks like is Copernicus. So it looks like a hexagon. So when you look at the basin impact on the far side of the moon, you'll see similar geometry all around. That's all I can really take away from it. What did the China missions uncover? Several things, right? They put out a news article that puts them in this kind of light that says, okay, China is more advanced than America right now in terms of lunar. It also puts out this thing where it's like, no, what do you mean we can take pictures on the surface of the moon? But nobody really has the follow-up where it's like, what are the pictures of? And why didn't you take these other obvious photos? And what else? And then, if you look at it from a purely altruistic sensibility where you're like, okay, these guys are genuine, I trust these guys, I trust agency science, what's going on? Because I'm willing to think about it like that. Let's say it's all real. India can land a rover or lose a rover. The Chinese are landing things at Sinus Iridum and taking pictures, and it's all kosher. What becomes suspect at that point is, why isn't it a bigger deal? Leaving Earth is one thing and miraculous. Landing on the moon is so overwhelmingly impressive that it should be an Earth-level event where everybody's paying attention. Twitter rises it to the top of trending. It's talked about for a week. There are experts. There are journalists. It's what's so fishy about the whole thing about the moon and Mars is how little detail there is, and how the hype is always more about, how cool is that guy for being so rich? Or how cool is that spacecraft for being so shiny? Nobody says, how did you deal with the radiation on the surface of the moon? Name me 5 regions on the moon. Name me 5 pieces of, 5 elements that occur on the surface of the moon. You just never hear that. So the lack of that information, to me, is what makes all these conspiracies actually somewhat okay, what's going on here? Why don't we have a landed on the moon day? People have a goddamn pancake day, but we don't have we literally landed on the moon and came back. Everybody survived, but that's not worth having a national holiday for. Something very suspect about the whole kind of space, deep space, deep state space, all of it. Space Force, what's really going on there? Can you go to space? Is it easy? It seems like it's not easy for some countries. And then Chinese are sending reliable rovers. That alone should be interesting to talk about, but you never see news shows talk about it. There are no channels that talk about it except to regurgitate the press statement, right? Look at Universe Today. Look at Deep Sky Astronomy. Look at the public stuff that's on YouTube with 200,000 views or millions of views. They literally rehash what the government agency tells them because they have to, right? Like, they don't do it necessarily to lie or be nefarious. They do it to stay in business because you got to like parrot the system if you're going to get the scoop. A little break here because I'm already feeling the strain on the shoulders. What should I play? What should I play? Let's do Throw Your Arms Down. Funky one. Funky jam. I was shaken by the pain of love.